discussing we're discussing the machlokes between Abaya and Rava on Yish Shalom Midas, if it's have a Yish, lo have a Yish, meaning if, in other words, if someone would be miyayesh without his knowledge, because if he knew, he would certainly give up. The question is, can that Yish, which is not a de jure Yish, meaning a Yish that actually happened, but an imputed Yish, whether or not that's a valid Yish, whether he gives up, and that's a machlokes Abai and Rava. Abai says you cannot be miyayesh, and Rava says you can. So
Rabbi Grauman,
yes.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Yes.
For Yish and Lamidas, actually, that we're talking about that right now. I actually love Lilk Felling because my son just actually completed a little bit of the sugya and he's 11. So he's actually, this is like the first real sugya in Gemara that he's doing. So it's really kind of apropos that we're doing now too.
Beautiful, beautiful, absolutely. Is he here?
He's actually upstairs.
Upstairs. Okay. Well, wonderful. This is a fascinating sugya, and it comes up in different places in Shas. But the question is a practical question. In other words, can someone be miyayish in his sleep? Something is going on. It clearly is an event that if he knew, he would say, "I give up." There's no question. But because he's not aware of it, do we impute? And this is the basic machlokes between Abai and Rava. Now, last week, we spent the entire Daf Chof Aleph Amid Beis going through a series of tashmas of cases where the Gemara wanted to primarily support Rava's view, the Yish Shalom Midas have a Yish, and in every case, the Gemara counted it and slugged it up and said, no, you can't bring a proof from that case because that case is different, meaning that the circumstances of a particular case is unique to that case, and therefore you can't draw a parallel to every other case. So that's where we are. We're in the middle of that, and we're still going to continue that with some fascinating cases that the Gemara is going to try to show us, either for Abaya or Rava in this case. But so that's where we are. On the very bottom of Chaf Aleph the base, Toshma. So here again, the Gemara wants to bring a raya to Rava that Yish Lo Midas have a Yish. And the Gemara says as follows. Aganav Shenokol Mizeh V'Nosen Lozeh. Someone is playing Robin Hood, and he steals from the rich and he gives to the poor, or he steals from somebody, he gives to somebody else. V'chein Gazlan, also a Gazlan Shenokol Mizeh V'Nosen Lozeh, and we've said in the past, but the Gemara will explain the chiluk between a Ganav and a Gazlan. Is a Ganav is what we would consider someone who is surreptitious, who is, we call a Ganav the greater of the two Isurim. Why? Because he is a Myra, he's afraid of people, but he's not afraid of the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, Rebbeinu Shalom can watch him do something and it doesn't matter as long as people don't see him. A Gazlan is a non-discriminating thief. He doesn't care Rebbeinu Shalom, he doesn't care people. So on a scale, says the halacha tells us that a Ganav pays kefil and a Gazlan doesn't pay kefil because a Ganav is more severe. But in either case,
I'm sorry, where are we exactly? I
at
apologize.
the very bottom of Chof Aleph Amid Beis, the very last line. The Gemara says, so a Ganav who steals, v'chein a Gazlan shenotol mizeh v'nosen lozeh, top of Chof Beis Amid Aleph now. V'chein Yarden shenotol mizeh v'nosen lozeh, the Jordan River, which Rashi says really refers to any river, but this particular Amora lived near the Jordan River. He'll use it as an example. Says Rashi, "V'chein kol shar na'oris v'tana zeh." I'm sorry, this Tana al yad Yarden haya yoshev. He was sitting near the Yarden, so he used the Yarden as an example. Also, so the Jordan River, any river that flows through and takes from the embankment or takes from one person, sweeps it down the river. I mean, how many times have we been maybe in a fast flowing river and we drop something in and all of a sudden it's in the middle of the river? Your miyai is so fast because there's no way you're going to recover it when you see it flying down the river.
I do that with my chatoim every Rosh Hashanah.
There you go. Well, that's the good thing, that they're far away from you in an instant. But it's something that you don't want to lose, right, that falls into the river. You're in the same boat. You lose everything. So all of these issues, so says the Gemara that whatever is done, meaning that it's gone. There's no way you can get it. So as an aside, says the Gemara, so the kasha here is whether or not you're miyayish. Okay, so bishloim a gazlan v'yardein, bishloim a gazlan. What is a gazlan? An open bandit. In other words, he's in the open.
Yeah,
He
excuse me,
costs you-
Rabbi, can I ask a question? I don't mean to be
Yeah.
flippant, but when you have a situation like in Florida, when a building collapses, and let's say some of the people that survive, but their apartment is gone, it's in the rubble, do they automatically miyayish all their possessions? Or do they hope that things might be found in the process of digging up the whole rubble?
So that's an excellent question. I think that might be an example where there is not Yush because it's all in front of you. It may be totally collapsed and it may be at this point unobtainable.
Right.
You know it's there. So let's say someone lost a ring, a very important ring, right? Engagement ring, a diamond ring, and they survived. Can they have a hope that the ring will be found? Of course. It may be a needle in a haystack, maybe not, because when you go through the fine tooth comb of the search, you may find it. They found, they found things in the, I think they've said they found in the last week a number of items, whether it was a toy or other things that belong to people. I mean, everything is going to be, carefully cataloged and everything else. So I think that's an example where l'chara there's no yush because it's self-contained, although very difficult at this point. When we talk about yush, we're talking about no way I'm going to be able to retrieve this. And again, the Yarden is a good example. Now, in the case of a thief, if someone robs you, you know what? Maybe you have a havamina that the police will or somehow they'll be captured with the goods on them. Yet the Gemara uses this as an example for Yush because you pretty much feel forlorn. Someone robbed me, Okay. So what does the Gemara say? Bishloim a gazlan v'yardein. Bishloim a gazlan, a very in-your-face thief. He's there openly. V'yardein the kachozale because you see them. Umiyayesh, and you're miyayesh. Okay, I understand that. Elaganaf, mikachozale, the miyayesh. A ganaf, the very essence of the ganaf is secrecy. How do you know you've been robbed? You don't know you're robbed. And yet the Gemara here says that ganaf notl mizeh v'nosan lazeh is miyayesh, l'cheretz haraya to Rava. Because Rava is the one who says that if you don't know, you would be miyayish. In other words, if you knew, you'd be miyayish. So this particular, okay, 1 second, Jay. So in this particular case, a ganav is a perfect example where you don't know you've been robbed. Let's say you went out for dinner and someone broke into your house and stole. Did you know? No. But the Gemara says miyayish. So the chayritz arayah to Rava, because there's a perfect example of where Rava imputes yiyush. Because you didn't know that if you would have known that the guy was breaking in, you would say, oh, I give up. But you don't know. And yet the Gemara says miyayish. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I wanted to welcome Joel Davis back on the Shiur. I just want to mention, Joel, that your mic is muted. Thank you. Okay, Rabbi.
Welcome, Joel. Yeah.
We've got to pause here for a second. So can I give another example? We're talking about the situation Florida, but a similar thing, unfortunately, with plane crashes. When there's a plane crash, if it's on land and it's not totally obliterated, usually the process is that whatever the police and military in that area, they go ahead and surround it, right? Even there's no survivors, they go ahead and protect the area. So the investigators go through, catalog everything, and return possessions to the next of kin.
Exactly right.
But every so often you hear about one in some country where it's almost lawless. And you hear the reports that the locals get a hold of everything and start looting all the possessions before the investigators and the military and all get to secure the site. And so you again have the question.
That's a perfectly good example of where the same event might be clear years in one place, because there's no question if it happened. I don't want to say where. If it happened in a place where you know it's going to be totally scavenged. Or if it happened, let's say here, you're right. If it happened on the fields of Pennsylvania in 9/11, where Rahman al-Islam, the plane crashed, but at least the survivors might have a havamina that there will be something salvageable. So Yiush in that particular case isn't always a perfectly lined up event in every case. You're right, absolutely. Yeah. Irv, did you have a question? No. Okay. So this is a good kasha. So l'chayra. So the Gemara first wants to give a raya to Rava, right? So Tirgama Rav Papa says Rav Papa belistim mizuyin, that a ganef doesn't mean a surreptitious ganef. He touches up. A ganef is listim mizuyin. There's two types of robbers. One is a robber who accosts you, and unfortunately, we've seen these terrible pictures in the news over the last weeks, where everybody, Eden particularly, but the people are being accosted in the street by gangs or individuals who are literally hitting them and robbing them. Right? That's a gazlan. Listim mizuyin is an armed robber. In other words, a robber is not just a robber; he's a robber who's armed, let's say, with a knife or a gun. In which case, says according to Rav Papa, that's a ganef. A ganef is listim mizuyin, and therefore, according to this interpretation, there's clear yiush. So this begs the question: what about a ganef that we know, the way we interpret a ganef, mean a surreptitious ganef? So there, it's a different question as to whether or not such a ganef there's yiush or not. Right? So you understand that again, this is a typical example. L'chayra is a raya to Rava, because it says that a ganef, if he robs, then there's yiush. It would seem to be that it would be imputed yiush. Teretz says Rav Papa, it's not imputed yiush, because he's more like a gazlan, but he's an armed robber. So no raya. Frank the Gemara, as an aside, ihocha haina gazlan. Says the Gemara, but what do you mean? You're telling me a list of Mizuyan? That's a gazlan. That's someone who's a gazlan in the middle of the open day. And for the Gemara, Trey Gavna Gazlan. Okay, so the answer is not quite what we're looking for. The Gemara says there's two types of Gazlan, one armed, one not armed. But that doesn't go to the heart of the question. The heart of the question is whether or not there is Yiush. So the teretz is that by Gazlan or list of Mizuyan, there is Yiush. What about a ganef as we define a ganef? That the Gemara doesn't address here. It's a very interesting point. So now we can speculate by a ganef, if you have the typical ganef where someone steals, let's say while you're out of town or somewhere else, are you miyayish without knowing? And that this Gemara does not address. But think about it. There, the question of Abaye and Rava really comes into a clear refrain. According to Abaye, no. And according to Rava, of course. He would be miyayish. If he knew, he'd be miyayish. So by not knowing, he's also miyayish. So that's how the Gemara wants to answer the question, and no raya to Rava. Okay, so that's another example. Now, the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara asks here in this Toshma, we're going to flip the switch. And it's not a raya to Rava. Here, the Gemara wants to bring a raya to Abaye. What does Abaye say? That yish shalom midas lo have yish. That there is no yish. So let's look at this. This example. Toshma, shotaf nor. If the river overflowed, korav eitziv of avonov, and it grabbed all of the eitzim and the avonim on the bank, meaning loose limbs, tree branches, stones, anything that the water could grab. V'nosnu b'toch sodeh chaveiro, and it spewed all this on as the river flowed through the property. It spit it all out on the field of the neighbor, meaning of the next field. Hare elu shalo, says the Gemara, mipnei shenishyashu habalim. Then he is it belongs to the second one. Why? Because of Yish. Says Rashi, Shatav no Karav Shalzeh Umatzan Acher. Hare elu shelo hachagirsa. Hare elu shelo mutnation is yeshu habalim. Why the whole shtifas nor kukoris eitzim vavonim habalim yodavo miyad yesh lo kol. So what are we talking about here? So this is a good example of what we're experiencing right now. Let's say in Florida, you have hurricane season. Right now, there's a big tropical storm or hurricanes hovering. If you live there and you know a hurricane is bearing down, Rashi is telling us in the Gemara, whatever you lose, forget about it. The hurricane will come in, it'll wipe it out, and you have no hava amina of retrieving it. That's what Rashi just says. The yeshla kol means that there is a coal. Everybody knows a hurricane is coming. So whatever you batten down, fine. Whatever you don't, you're going to lose it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When we have a huge storm, and I have my garbage cans out on the street after the storm, I can't find half of them because the wind has blown them a block and a half away. So I've lost cans and other things just because, and again, it's in the neighborhood. So it's not a question of years. I walk around and I can't find it. Tell before, if you have a hurricane or you have a flooding river that just completely grabs everything in its path, the minute you see it, you're sunk. You said, of course I'm not going to find it. So that's pshat here in this Gemara.
There was a mudslide in Japan over the weekend where you could see that very thing. You could see literally
right.
A whole river of mud moving things from one field to the other.
Exactly right. And we've seen this, by the way, in monsoons and other things, whether it's in Asia or other places. We've seen this. We've seen pictures of literally a town is moved. I mean, who's not going to be miyayish? Who is not going to say, what are you talking about? I saved my life. That's all I need. Okay, so that's the Gemara. Zok the Gemara, Tamo Nisyaishu Habalim. The reason why you say this is because Nisyaishu Habalim, Hostama low, but in other words, if is because the Balam Miyayish, that's where you do it. But what about where it's not a hurricane? What about where it's not a hurricane? Meaning that it's just a normal event. L'chari, you would extrapolate that there isn't Yush, right? The reason why there's Yush is because there's a call that this massive event is going to happen. But according in this particular case, where there isn't a massive event, you can extrapolate that there isn't Yush, says the Gemara, it's a raya to Abaya. Abaya is the one who says, and we're talking about normal, that if a person experiences a loss, he's miyayish. But if he doesn't know, he's not miyayish. L'chayr, from this Gemara, it's a raya to Abaya, because the Gemara says over here, specifically in this particular brisa, that the reason why you're nisyayish, the reason why it's not yours is because you're nisyayish by a major event. But stama, says Rashi, from Hoysa Aveda Acher she'ein lo melomer sheyadu habalim lo hoya shel motza kosher l'rava. So here he wants to extrapolate from this event, for this case, against Rava, that year shaloi medas lo have a year. So that's the Gemara's question here. It's just very simply, how do we reconcile? Emphit the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Hacham ma'askinen yishiyochel lahatzel," where he can save it. Says Rashi, the Chavase b'metzia acheres dover sheyesh bo simin yochel litin simin v'little modinale dechayev lahatzel. You know why we're talking about? No, it's no raya to Abaya. Because Stamazar, you still might say that Yish Lo Midas Lo have a Yish. But the reason why over here, when we say Stamalo, is because it's speaking about a case, Sheyachal Hatzel, he can still salvage it. Like you say, Jay, maybe the tower fell down, but he knows that it's there. So why should he be Miyayish? It may take a week, it may take a month, but I'm going to find my ring potentially because it's there. It didn't fly off. So says the Gemara, Yachal Hatzel, therefore, this particular case can't be a raya to Abaya against Rava because it's a different circumstance. Remember, we're trying to distinguish the circumstances. So in a case where you Yachal Hatzel, fine. But in the case Yachal Hatzel, then there's no Yish.
All right, so if I can, still bothered by this
Yeah, go ahead.
sort of thing. They're basically forcing everybody in the second tower 3 miles north to evacuate, and they're loading their cars and everything. In that case, when they bring down the tower because the storm is coming, they're not going to necessarily hand pick through everything. You can't expect them for a building that has no people, that they're going to be much more, just as careful with every square inch of dust. So the chances of you finding anything that you didn't take.
No, right, but there, if it's a controlled implosion and a person takes what he can, a person might still say, you know what? I'm not being miyayish what I can't take, because it's a controlled implosion. It's for safety that it's coming down, but I still have a havamina that once things get better, it's going to be secured with a fence, and I'm going to be able to come back. You can't impute yish in a case where there's a reasonable, not unreasonable, a reasonable expectation that you will be able to retrieve it. You may never retrieve it. Let's not say you may never, but you have a reasonable expectation that if it's a controlled implosion and you're going to go back, you'll find it. It may take a long time, but why should I be miyayish when I think I can get it back? So this is all in the mind of an individual as to whether or not he feels forlorn.
So it's still up to the individual's thinking.
It's still up, exactly right.
No general rule anymore for that.
Except that we can say generally, is this an event where most people would say, I'm miyayish? If you have a river that rips through, or a monsoon, or an ocean that rips through your property and pulls it away, the reasonable person would say, goodbye, I lost it. Now, you or I might hold out some infinitesimal percentage of possibility, but Rove would say it's not likely. But when you have it in front of you because something happened, but it's there, why should I give up? I may not find it. It'll take a long time, but I don't give up.
Yeah, okay, one more interruption. Michael's here. Michael, do you have any refuah shleimus?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry I'm late. Yes, thank you, Jay. Prosper Ben Aliza,
Pastor Ben Eliza,
Sorbas Esther,
Rabbi Esther,
Marissa Bas Toby.
Risha Bastovi.
Thank you, Jay.
What I'm trying to emphasize to everybody is, for those who have something to announce, please be online at 5 to 10 so that I don't have to interrupt the rabbi, continuously. So thank you, Michael.
Okay, so this is the kasha. So we're saying kishiyachal hatzel, therefore it's no raya, since you can salvage it, it's no raya. Frank the Gemara, if we're talking about a case of yachal hatzel, then what about this? So we just learned the first part of the brisa. Yehacha ema seifa. Let's look at the seifa, the last part of that brisa. If you have a situation, let's say where the river overflowed and it started grabbing things on the river and it started going further down, and the Baal, as sometimes happens, sees it in front of him, and he said, oh, no, I've got to retrieve that. And he starts running on the riverbank parallel to where his thing is floating down the river, and he sees it, but he runs after it because he's hoping that he'll be able, maybe it'll be snagged by a piece of wood, or maybe the river will turn and throw it out. So he's chasing it. Says the Gemara, Chayv lahachzir. In that case, there is no yish because there's active participation by the owner to try to get it. You can't impute yish in that case, right? Frek the Gemara, if our brisa is talking, you just wanted to give me a teretz and say you can't bring a raya to Abaya or to Rava because yachal hatzel, my yir meratzin afila ein meratzin nami. Why does the Sefer of the brisa give us an example of where the owner is chasing it? Forget about chasing it. If he thinks he has a hava amina of salvaging it, even if he didn't chase it, it should not be yish. So the Gemara's kasha here is, let's be consistent. If we're talking about a case, you want to distinguish this case and say it's no raya to Abaya.
But how can you know what the owner was thinking? we're bringing cases here. How can you ever know what the owner was thinking? You have to impute what a reasonable owner would think.
Correct.
In this case, we have an additional data point in that he was chasing the object. So now we don't have to impute anything. We have our
Right,
answer.
right. You're absolutely right, Chaim, except that the Gemara here is telling us that our circumstance, the whole inyan, is where it's salvageable. In other words, this particular case is not a case where it's one and done, it's gone. It's salvageable. So if we're talking about a case where it's salvageable, Frek the Gemara, why do you have to have Rodfin? Why do you have to have him? Why do you have to have him chasing if it's salvageable even without chasing?
But just of interest here, he's chasing after something that may not be salvageable.
No, but the Gemara is talking about, just gave you an answer that we're talking about where it's salvageable. In other words, our case is dealing by a salvageable item, and therefore you can't bring a raya to a baya. That's
right. So this is a good question. Why do you need him chasing? Right.
So why do you have to chase it? If it's salvageable, in any event, there's no yish even without. So if you're saying that the ratio is salvageable, you got to talk. The sefer has to be salvageable. How do you reconcile the ratio and the sefer? If the sefer says if he's chasing, it's not years. If he's not chasing, it's years. Why is it years? You're telling me it's salvageable. Why would he give it up? So that's the Gemara's kasha. Right? And for the Gemara, we're talking about in other words, with great difficulty, you can salvage it. Therefore, Meratfin, if he's chasing it, he hasn't given up hope, even though it's difficult. Lo yayish. A Meratfin yayish. But the Gemara is telling us, in other words, this is human nature. If you can salvage it, why should I chase it? I know it's going to be there. That's the Surfside Tower. Why should I be miyayish? It's there. It's going to be there today. Unfortunately, it's going to be there next week and next month. I don't have to be. But if I have a circumstance, let's just say the tower fell down and now you have a monsoon coming through that is going to rip the debris from that tower into the ocean all over the place. So you have a case where maybe I can save it, maybe not. But now it's bitchak. It's bitchak. It's with great difficulty because that hurricane is going to rip stuff. Anything that isn't pinned down, even though it's flattened out, may be lost. Now I have a havamina. Oh, wait a minute. Now it may be washed away. Therefore, says the Gemara, if I start digging to salvage Meratfin, meaning that he's oisek, that is no yish. But if he's not Meratfin and it's b'shas atchak, vada yish. So in other words, again, the Gemara distinguishes enough here to say it's no raya to Abaya or Rava. We're trying to bring a raya to Abaya, but it's no raya to anybody because we're talking about a circumstance that is not the normal circumstance where one can say there's an imputed yish. And again, everybody asks this question. It's in the mind of the beholder. Yish is something that's subjective as opposed to objective. What we're trying to say is, in the normal course, when we look at this, would most people say, I'm miyayish? There are people who are tenacious and say, you know what, I don't give up. I will go to the ends of the earth to find. Is that reasonable? Maybe not. Maybe not. So you can't take from an extreme and say that's the general rule. So we're all sensible people, and we look at an event and it unfolds in front of us. Now you could say, Jay, well, maybe there's that one person who's not miyayish. She's just so stubborn, and his efforts will be proven successful over the course of time. It's possible, but that's not the norm. So we're going Bussa Road. Bussa, what is the norm? And that's why, in this case, we say there's no yish. Okay? So take a look at Rashi. So Rashi asks the kasha, if we're talking about Hatzel, I feel a Marat Fanami. Why does it have to be Ratcha? That he chased it, even without chasing, it's still considered to be no yish. The Samcha Ahatzola de Lamocha Liyuma Achrita V'lo Miyayish. He's assuming that he will be able to save it tomorrow or the next day, and he's not miyayish. That's exactly our situation here. If the tower fell and everything is there, then as sad as the situation is, someone has an heirloom or something, you say, you know what? I'm not miyayish. I'm not going to allow scavengers to pick it apart and say goodbye. I'm going to find it. It may take me time, but I will find it. Al Yidei Hatzak, says Rashi, Lo Yimar Lahatzel, if he doesn't hurry to save it, Lo Yatzilu. Hilkach Ein Meratvin, Afkura Afkamina, V'Hoyode V'Lo Yatzilu. Here's a perfect example in a case where it's difficult, but if he hurries up and chases, he may get it. So by not chasing it, he's telling you, I give up. By not chasing it, he's saying, I give up. I can't run after it, and I'm going to lose it. And we all have that. I've had that situation where, something, that was important to me. I ran after it. I may have realized after running and I'm out of breath, I'm not getting this, but at least I tried. So therefore, that's pshat meradfin. But where a person says, I give up, forget about it, and you know that the river is going to keep taking it down, then unfortunately, we have to say no. All right. So again, no raya from this case. No raya. Zak the Gemara Vaita. So now we're still trying to find out who the halacha is, and we're going to go through a few more twists and turns until we get to a very interesting conclusion. Says the Gemara Toshima. Ketzad Omru. This is what the Chazal said. HaTorem Shalom Midas Trumoso Truma. So generally, there's a rule that if someone, if you have a field, right, and I come into your field, and we know that you can't partake from a field until you give truma and maser and everything, all the other things that are appropriate. So I come into your field and I give truma from your field. I go into your field and I give truma. Atorim shalom midas trumoso truma. Says the Gemara, says the Brisa there, that the truma is considered a good truma. Right?
A question here.
Yeah.
You said, because the Gemara doesn't, so Lomidas, but did you have, I'm guessing this means you have permission, because otherwise the whole thing's stolen, right? Or what's going on?
No. I go into your field and I don't take it for myself. I literally do your deed. You have to give truma.
Okay, so I'm harvesting stuff on behalf of the owner,
without
but he
the
doesn't,
owner's knowledge.
Without the owner's knowledge. But it's not like I'm trying to take the fruit for myself.
No, exactly
Okay.
right. So if there's
But
no
how
theft,
can you go on that field to harvest on behalf of the owner? You're contracted to be on that field. Is that what we're saying? You're an employee.
well, again, so that's a good question. So let's not answer that question right now. But for our purposes, let's just say that he's a worker. He's a worker. He has a right to be there.
Okay.
But he wasn't told by the owner give truma.
And did it anyway.
Right? Now, remember we said a klal zochim la'adam shaloi b'fanav. So l'chayra, what happens if he wasn't a worker? It was you, Chaim. You came and you saw Reuven's field and you said, "What? I'm doing Reuven a favor. I know he hasn't harvested yet. I want to make sure nobody's over a lav here." So I'm immediately going to give truma so that this field is not tevel. In other words, you want to do a good deed. You're a good Samaritan.
It's misguided. It's geneva.
This guy. Well, it's not geneva because it's l'shem mitzvah. The question is, Zochel la'adam shalei b'fanav, are you allowed to do
But
it?
I like that better as an employee, because the employee also did it without permission, but he's giving the owner a benefit.
Correct.
And he's giving the Kohen that he's giving the truma to a benefit. I mean, they're both getting benefit.
Right. But Chaim, that same benefit is in place even without an employee. If you are walking,
But it's a false pretense. It's a robber who's doing a good deed. Okay.
Again, I'm not saying no. I'm just the point here is that
Both are getting the schus. Forget the intermediary. Yes.
Okay. So at the end of the day, the owner would ask himself, did I benefit from this even though I didn't give permission?
And he did, in essence, it would seem. It would
Right.
seem.
Because it's a mitzvah, right?
Right.
Okay.
But there's another complication maybe, which is, if I remember correctly, truma is not like some of the things you have to, you bring the base makers and you have no control of which Cohen takes, and you can't select. But truma, I believe, if I remember correctly, you can pick which Cohen gets your truma.
Correct. Correct.
So it could be that your employee comes in, he gets up early, he start harvesting, and he gives it to the truma to his neighbor because he really wants to be nice to his neighbor, the Cohen. But if the Baal, the owner of the field, had done it, he would have given it to a different Cohen.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So this isn't as simple as it looks. So let's take a look. So Shalom Midas Trumos or Truma. It's Truma. Now, this isn't the case of Yiush. So what we're going to try to extrapolate from this case is what Yiush would look like. But there's no Yiush here. This is simply a case where a person gives Truma on behalf of an owner. Right? So the Gemara says Trumos Truma, that it's good Truma. Now, another example, a person went down into his friend's the field of his friend, the liket, and he took leket, right, without telling the owner, right? V'toram shelo b'rshus. Im chayshish b'shum gezel. If, again, to your point, if we're chayshish, if we suspect, and he says, you have no right to give truma to that kohen, that's theft. I didn't authorize you to give, exactly your point. I don't want to give to that kohen. I don't like that kohen. I want to give to my kohen. So if in his mind he's saying, you're a gazlan, ain't truma so truma, then that truma is not truma. The ground is still tevel. I mean, the produce is still tevel, and he has to give a different truma. Now, if he can collect that truma back, that's not the relevant question. The relevant question is this property now properly given truma, or is the rest of it tevel? That's the question. So,
Rabbi, I have another question.
Yeah.
If somebody's taken truma without your knowledge, without your permission,
right.
And we said that he's doing it for your benefit,
which Zachar
Right.
Adam Shalom B'fanav.
right? But I don't know it, so I'm going to give truma again. That's duplicate. That's more than I'm supposed to give,
Correct.
and
Correct.
so I'm losing. I'm not. This isn't my benefit.
Right. But you're right. This circumstance the Gemara is positing is where he finds out before he gives a second truma that the truma was given on his behalf. You're right. If he doesn't know when he gives, that could certainly be gazela because the guy did it unauthorized.
So again, we have to get into the head of the owner here.
Correct.
Would he impute gazela to the guy who did this?
It's a catch, but it's also a catch-22 on the owner, because now the owner is in a terrible position. If he's already given truma, okay, great, but it's not the guy he wanted. But if it's the guy he didn't want, he has to do truma again. So he's in a catch-22. So is he gonna want to? It's not his benefit anymore. So what's he going to do?
Right. So this is how the Gemara sorts it out. You're right.
Also, the question of the amount of truma. There's no minimum amount.
There's no minimum.
He gives an amount that the owner would not.
Absolutely. Good question, Dave. That's exactly part of what the Gemara is asking here. So the Gemara is asking all these questions wrapped into one. Im chayshish mishum gezel. If he says, wait a minute, I have my own mind. I know what I want to do and to who I want to do it, and this is gezela. So im chayshish mishum gezel. What the Gemara is mechadish to us is you can undo the truma. That's not a valid truma. Can he collect it back or not? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if he's chayshish mishum gezela, the property is still tavel. That's the point.
Right.
In other words, he now has to give truma. He has to give truma. So Mishum gets the imlav, right? And if it's not gazel, so you have to listen. Harishabor balabayis umotzo. So the balabayis comes and he sees his worker. We're talking about a worker here, time. So clearly the guy's on the field. He's working, and he knows that the guy gave truma. He knows that the worker gave truma. Umotzo, when he finds him, va'omalo, and he says to this worker, kalach etzel yofais. You should have given from the better. You hear what he says? In other words, he comes over to him and he says, you gave from this, why didn't you give from my better product? So he's already l'chayra of a mindset that he wants to give. And
But he's of the mindset that the worker erred.
right. So he's chastising the worker. Why didn't you give from the, if you already gave from me, why didn't you already give better?
But then,
Or David, to your point, why didn't you give more? Why didn't you give as a Bainani? Why didn't you give already instead of 160th or 150th, you should have given 140th. In other words, he's questioning him. So listen to the way the Gemara answers it. Im nimtze yofas mehen. So if he chastised the worker and he said, why didn't you give better? And you find better. In other words, now we're going to look in the field and we're going to see, what did this worker really do? Did he just take from whatever he got and he didn't look for the best? So if you find better, trumasoi truma, then it's considered that it's valid and he wants to add more. In other words, he's saying what you, the worker, did, maskim, you gave truma, I'm potter mit truma. I want to give more or better because I have better. And that's what I meant to give. So I'm not undoing what you did. I'm just giving more. The imlav, but if I don't find better on the field, ain't truma so truma, then his truma is not truma because he's chastising him and almost like to say,
which revealed his mindset that he's
exactly right,
saying you did wrong. Right.
Exactly right. So this is a very interesting circumstance where depending on if the Baal made this comment, depending on the outcome of his comment, it is or isn't truma.
And all this supports that we are very interested in the mindset of the individual owner. That
Right.
So what happens to the neighbor that the worker gave the truma to? What's the status of that truma that he gave to his friend?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. So from the standpoint of the Baal, that you mean to the Kohen, to the friend, the Kohen.
Right.
So from the standpoint of the Baal, it's not truma. It's not truma because he's going to give it to somebody else. From the standpoint of the individual, he may have to return it because it was an unauthorized gift. In other words, that Kohen, that worker had no right to give the produce to the Kohen if the Kohen didn't eat it or use it. I mean, he's innocent here. But if the Balabais goes to the Kohen and says, I'm sorry, Mr. Kohen, this is a mistake. You really have to give it back to me. He's entitled to get it back. If the Kohen used it, fafalin, of course, but it was not done intentionally. But it gets complicated because now it's gezela. I mean, in the mind of the Baal, the worker had no right to do it. And therefore, what he did has to be undone. Can it be undone?
Everybody loses.
Everybody loses, and the
Full Employment Act for lawyers to sort it out.
Could it be also if in the case that the owner says, you know what, I am a Yayesh on this also because he got it, he's not going to may not give it back. Could just say, I'll just leave it as matana. It may not be considered truma, but we'll call it a matana. Can you leave it at that also?
If
he can, absolutely. He can say farfalin, but it's not my truma.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So I'm not counting as truma, but it's matana. It's just matana. I'm disclaiming it. It's a gift.
Disclaiming it as truma. Now, why would he want to do that? I mean,
there's no good reason to it, but right, exactly.
Right, but you see that in other words, what's interesting is because of the way the Gemara says he said it, which is to say, why didn't you give better? He is intimating that if there is better to give, then what you gave is fine. It's truma. I'm just going to be minamufcher and give a little bit more. But if what you gave is the best you can do and there isn't more, then I'm not obligated to accept that as my truma. I want to give that truma to somebody else. I can't give better because I don't have better. But I don't want to give it to Reuven the Kohen. I want to give it to Shimon the Kohen, right? So anyway, the side questions about whether or not he gets it back or is it Geneva, these are all side questions. But let's get to the heart of our Gemara. So the heart of our Gemara is if he didn't say Truma. V'chi nimtze yofes mehem trumosei truma. Frek the Gemara, you're telling me that if he finds better, trumosei truma, amai. Why is it truma? The idna the Torah holo havayada. At the time that he gave the truma, he didn't know there is better. So l'chayra, that should be valid. Again, we have to extrapolate in the case of years because this is not years. So l'chayra, this is a raya to Rava. Why is it truma? It's not truma. At the time, he didn't know. Teretz is, we're imputing that it's truma. Just like we're imputing Yiyush to Rava, we're imputing Truma. So the Gemara asks, so the Gemara says, this is a good raya to Rava because you see that we're imputing Truma, right? I mean, that's the point here. It says Rashi, Shalom Adas Balam Veloket Latorach Balabayis, the Im Chayshish Balabayis, Umakbid Al Masha Osazem Mishum Gezel, Shetorim Trumosa B'Rishus, right? So therefore it says, Kolach Eitzel Peira Yofos. If he tells him, why didn't you give from the better? Hoyolach Leilech Eitzel Yofos Loses Mehen Lakayin. You should have given him from the better, right? So it says, Loy Hoya Yoda, Alma, given the Lechi Yoda, the Nichale, or Minimi Koranami Nichale, in Yish Nami, given the Lechi Yoda, Miyayish Mikora Nama have a year. So this is the point. This is the what we're taking out of this case is this is how it's compared to years, just like there by Truma, right? We say that he didn't know, but yet it's Truma. The same thing by years, even though he didn't know, it's still years. So this is the proof to Rava. But it's fascinating in our case as to with regard to Truma how this comes about. So that's the proof here the Gemara wants to give, right?
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Isn't it a little, I don't think it's the same case because in the case of the Truma,
Right.
You're appointing an agent, and that agent, if you want to carry out the mitzvah yourself, you have different standards than the person that you impart that to. So on the back end, if you're authorizing them to give Truma on your behalf, then they're going to take their standards. And if it's an agent who's working for you, they're going to say, I want to preserve the best for my Baal because I don't want to give everything away. So if that's the case, he's either fulfilled the mitzvah or he should have taken it on himself. So you're really transferring the intent to the agent as opposed to the case of Yush, where it's your individual intent. Isn't there a difference?
So Michael, I love you for what you just said. But what you just said is the teretz to our kasha. The kasha is, l'chayra, it's a raya to Rava. Why? Because remember, the agent wasn't appointed. The agent on his own went and took Truma on behalf of the owner. The owner didn't know. We're backing into this and we're saying, what happens now when the owner finds out that the agent took Truma? Then we're saying, depending on what we find, the owner will endorse what the agent did or not endorse. So this whole Gemara is without the knowledge of the owner, the agent did it. Therefore, we're comparing it to years. What you just said, take a look at the Gemara. This is the teretz. Tirgama Rava Aliba de Abaya. So now this is a good kasha, right? The Gemara says, if Truma is a Truma, Amai in the Truma Polo Yoda. He didn't know. So why is the Truma? Why is it? So it's a raya to Rava. Tirgama Rava Aliba de Abaya. Rava answers according to Abaya, the Shavia Shaliach. He made a shaliach, just what you just said. This isn't the case where the worker did it on his own, in which case l'chayra would be a good raya to Yiyush, according to Rava, for the reasons we just said, because it's a perfect parallel. The teretz is, no, he made a shaliach, says Rava. Rava, in fact, is undoing his own proof by saying, you can't bring a raya to me because we're talking about a case where there's a shaliach. So if there's a shaliach, like you just said, Michael, there's a shaliach, then it's a different case entirely.
Exactly.
Then it's not at all our case of Yiyush. So you can't bring a raya to Rava. That's exactly the teretz. Okay, so, and the Gemara says, Hochinami mistabra, and it's reasonable to assume, that there's a shliach, the isol kedata the lo shav shliach. If you say that there was no shliach, mi have a truma, is the truma really truma? V'ho atem gam atem omarachmona. The rabba shluchaschem. Ma atem ledatchem, ashluchechem ledatchem. All right, so now we're getting into a little bit of a different sugya, which again, because of the timing, we're almost at 11, I'm not going to push forward here, and we're going to pick this up. But the teretz is, in short, the teretz is that you have to say we're talking about a shaliach, and therefore, in other words, talking on in the stabra, and therefore it's not a raya to Rava. The whole point of this whole truma thing was to bring a raya to Rava that Yir Shalom Midash have a Yish. And the answer is, like Michael said, no, it's a different case because we're talking about a shaliach. If there's a shaliach, then he knows in advance. If he knows in advance, there's no Yir Shalom Midas. Remember, the whole case is Yir Shalom Midas. The Baal didn't know that his agent was giving truma, and the Gemara wants to interpret: is it okay? Is it not okay? The Gemara says, if it's okay, it's a raya to Rava. And for the Gemara, no, different case entirely. We're talking about a shaliach. What we're going to have to pick up is the intricacies of shlichus with regard to giving truma. And there's a pasuk in the Torah which we're going to review next week, Mitzvah Shem, and we're going to understand. So the Gemara goes much further into this. But for our purpose right now, we have slugged up the raya to Rava. We say it's no raya to Rava because our case and Rava's case are two different cases. Rava's case is Yir Shalom Midas, and our case is Midas. Why? Because he appointed a shaliach. That's the key. Since he made a shaliach, therefore it's different. If he hadn't, you're right. This would be on all fours with Rava. It would be a complete proof to Rava. So Mitzvah Shem will pick up from here, and it's fascinating how the pasuk in the Torah is going to explain to us the whole thing, and we'll quickly review it and then go on by connect Mitzvah Shem next week.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
You see how fascinating these halachas are, halacha lemaisa, because you brought Jay about the Surfside Tower. I mean, everything we do is not necessarily just an esoteric discussion. It's a real discussion to lemaisa as to whether or not Yir Shalom Midas have a Yish or not, and whether or not a particular event you can impute that there's Yish. And we see this all the time. I mean, in life, we see that we have events every single day that affect how the Gemara explains.
Exactly. All right.
Have a happy 4th of July.
Happy Independence Day.
Everybody be safe today.
And I'll take the 5th.
And I think Michael,
That's the
Michael remembered the answer from when we learned this Gemara 25 years ago.
You see that? You see that? Actually, let me just ask a quick question. There's a big rally next Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Is it? What time is that rally? Are people going to go?
I don't know, but
time.
What's the rally?
What's the rally?
No, I'm saying the shiur is regular. We're going to have the shiur, but I'm just saying that it's not interfering. If people want to go, they should go. But
what is the
No,
rally?
what's the rally? No, we don't know.
the rally, just supporting the or anti-Semitism. I think.
Right. It's a big rally.
Where is it?
Yeah, where is it?
Downtown. It's downtown.
It's downtown, but I would imagine it starts around noon or so. So
Maybe around noon. Okay. Anyway,
we should have a class period.
yeah, Jay, we're gonna follow our marching orders. We're gonna learn Mitzvah Shem till 11, and then we'll have
Whatever. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Have a great week.
Have a safe week.
Have a good day.
Really?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank you.